All right. Good evening, everyone. It is such a privilege to have all of you in the room this beautiful Thursday night. We are very excited about tonight's Ethnic and Racial Heritage Community panel. I would like to get started by introducing the session and giving just a little bit of context of where this panel fits in the programming and the efforts that we are developing at Drew. So let me share my screen, if that's okay. Oops. So one wonderful thing about Drew is that we're working very hard to figure out a way to facilitate a holistic experience for each of our students. And the way in which we have attempted to do this since almost 2 years ago is through a program called Launch. And what I'd like to do is very briefly, just in a nutshell, tell you a little bit about what Launch is and what are the key strategies of Launch. Launch is a new approach to undergraduate education. It has 3 goals. It has the goal of helping students identify a purpose at a time when we have learned that 87% of the world's workforce is struggling to find meaning in what they do. The second goal is to prepare students for their careers at a time when we are expecting that students will go through 11.9 transitions in their journey, and that 86% of the careers they'll pursue are careers that don't exist yet. So it's a challenging job market and a challenging environment in which they're going to be starting their next steps. And the third goal is to prepare them for their impact in the community and the world. When we're noticing that our challenges are systemic, they're affecting all of us, what we think, what we do, how we lead matters. And it affects all of us. We are interrelated, interconnected, and interdependent. So 3 goals of purpose, career, and impact. Now, Drew comes to life in an integrated and universal way through 7 key strategies. One of them is a course that we teach to all students in their 2nd semester called Drew 110, through which we introduce all students to Launch and engage students in all things Launch. The course is connected or part of the curriculum is the development of an e-portfolio called the Launch Plan. You can see here the curriculum of the course and how we walk students through self-assessment, identification of needs in the community and the world, identification of paths, engagement in communities with mentors and experiences to prepare an action plan that helps them move forward in a more prepared way. So that's the course and the plan. The second curricular component are immersive experiences. Students are expected to do at least 2 immersive experiences. And what we have done is we have established criteria that students need to complete to make them meaningful. But then they can do any type of experience to try to diversify our access to the opportunities that students have. Now, these curricular components have a very intentional focus on transferable skills, both their development and their articulation, as well as on interaction with mentors to make sure that their experience is supported and targeted. And in order to scaffold all of that, we have made available career communities, which are clusters of programming, networks, and opportunities and resources based on career interests. And we also have identity affinity communities. You can see that we have an ethnic and racial heritage community, right? It has, of course, programming like today's panel. It has networks like mentors. And it also has a page where we highlight a number of different resources and opportunities and support and mentors focused on this particular interest of ethnic and racial heritage. So you can see featured opportunities, internship and job databases. You can see mentors, blogs, events, success stories, you can see opportunities, you can see resources, all of them curated, student organizations, courses and special electives, all curated specific to this particular type of interest and identity. Now, part, as I was mentioning, of launch is programming. This fall, we have implemented our 2020 Launch Expo, which has 3 components. One is a launch community panel series. This is one of 18 panels we have done this term, 1 per each of our communities. We also had an immersive experiences fair and a launch communities fair. So you can see here, we have our panel tonight, and we have a whole series of panels. And most of them we have recorded and they're available as recordings. And then the ones that are upcoming are available for people to participate. And then we also have our immersive experiences fair recorded. So you can see, how students presented on their immersive experiences. And we just had about 2 weeks ago, our launch communities fair, where we had a virtual space for each of these communities with student leaders, faculty, staff, alums, and employers. So what we're trying to do is to make available as many opportunities to our students in a way that helps them network, find the experiences that they want, and find community at a moment when that is more challenging than usual. Today we have a fantastic panel and we're really excited about our conversation. I think it is very timely given the circumstances we're experiencing right now in our community and in society. And I want to thank everyone for spending some of your personal time to be here, and Dunstanet for moderating this panel. So let me stop there and pass the torch to you, Dunstanet.
Thank you, Daniel. I just want to welcome everybody to this evening's Ethnic and Racial Heritage Community Panel. We have a couple of Drew community members here to talk a little bit about their experience as it relates to ethnicity and race. I think this conversation should be really interesting. Just so you all know, I put the program in the chat. If you arrived a little bit later, I'll put it in once we get some questions going, so you can follow along. We'll have time for questions at the end, but if you have any questions as we go along, please feel free to place them in the chat and we'll get to them. Obviously, if they're related to the exact question, I think we could probably put it in so it flows a little bit nicely, but if not, we can wait until the end to answer all of your questions. But don't be shy about putting questions in the chat as they come up. So we're going to get started. So the first question we have is really just asking you all who you are, right? I know all of you are not alum, but what's your relationship to Drew? What did you major in and what do you do today? And we can start with Isha.
All right, so my name's Isha, and I graduated from Drew University in 2012, where I majored in sociology and minored in public health. And interestingly, I started off going to Drew for pre-med. So I took all the all the science classes. I was a chemistry major. Then I took sociology and, really liked that and somehow ended up in law school. So I went to Michigan State University College of Law, graduated in 2016, and now I'm an attorney in personal injury, so essentially car accidents.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. All right, Daniel Vieira.
Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Vieira. I'm a current student at Drew. I'm in my 3rd year. I'm an Italian studies and Spanish double major with a photography minor. And I guess I can talk a little bit about how I got to Drew. My intentions were to go on the pre-med route too, and then quickly realized after I made my decision to come to Drew that it wasn't for me. And I was lucky enough to have all of the support available at Drew from peers, faculty and staff, and I was able to explore my options, and I ended up falling in love with photography and as a minor, and decided to explore more with Spanish as a native Spanish speaker, and Italian as I had studied it in high school and I wanted to master it. So here I am.
Thank you. All right, Dr. Prelo.
Good evening, everyone. Really good to see you all. I'm Dr. Prelo, Xavier Prelo. I graduated from Drew in 2002, which is almost 20 years ago and a little bit unbelievable. But while I was at Drew, also I'm a first generation college student born and raised in Jersey City, New Jersey. And so while I was at Drew, I majored in history and Pan-African studies as a minor. From there, Lily Johnson Edwards, most of you don't know her. She retired maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, was my advisor and mentor. But I went to Michigan State. I started at Michigan State, but then transferred to the University of Illinois, where I completed a PhD in American history. From there, I went to University of Augusta, where I was tenure track faculty member teaching American history. And while I was doing that, because I was young, single, didn't have any family, I was driving up and down the highway to go to Columbia Theological Seminary in Atlanta, Georgia, and also got an MDiv, and decided, well, I want to try something else. And so I jumped ship on a tenure track faculty position, which my mother thought something was wrong with me, because who does that, right? And ultimately became a pastor, and I was pastoring the small church in rural South Carolina. And then from there, I moved to Washington, D.C. about 3 years ago. And so I feel like I'm living my dream job because I get to be a pastor and I continue to teach. I'm a historian at heart, regardless of where my career takes me. So I pastor full time and I teach adjunct as history professor at Bowie State University. But my passions are equipping people for leadership and change. And so I do that, do my teaching, my preaching, my pastoral care, and my scholarship. But at the end of the day, I believe history is necessary for us to continue to equip ourselves and have intercultural dialogue. So yeah, it's great being closer back to New Jersey. And I'm also co-chair of the Black Alumni Association of Drew University, which is brandy new. And I'm looking forward to sharing more about that later. Okay.
Great, thank you. Rachel.
I can't follow that up. No, I'm just kidding.
Rachel.
Hi everyone, my name is Rachel Sawyer. I am unfortunately not a Drew alumni, but I am originally from Norwalk, Connecticut. I went to Eastern Connecticut State University. I studied communications and women's studies, and then from there I ended up at Rutgers University. So I got my master's in college student affairs, which is under the Graduate School of Education. And then 2 years ago, feels so long, I got a job here at Drew. So I currently serve as the Associate Director of Student Engagement here. So I focus a lot on programming and doing a lot of diversity programming on top of that. So anti-racism and oppression work is a passion of mine. I also work in residence life. And in addition, I'm a supervisor for like different cultural clubs on campus, including the Black Student Union, ADL, Drew African Student Association, the BIPOC peer mentoring, so Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and the ABC House on campus, so the African, Black, and Caribbean House. I'm also an advisor for Capture Success Scholars under the Francis B. Sellers program. So it was formerly known as EOS, which is essentially mentoring students from underrepresented backgrounds. In addition, I am a Drew 110 instructor and the community coordinator of this lovely Launch Affinity group. So that is my mouthful.
Thank you, Rachel. All right, so Daniel Pasco, who are you?
Thank you. That was a funny question. Thank you, that's Annette. I hope I don't tell you how old I am by answering the question, but I am a Mexican citizen living in the United States, but I have been in the United States close to 30 years now, unexpectedly. I lived in Mexico City all the way through my college education. My undergrad was in industrial design, and I did some work on that. I also did some ministry down in Mexico and came to the United States to go to seminary in Philadelphia, and I did a Master of Divinity there. And I became a minister. I was a youth minister for some time and then became a senior minister. I was ministering a congregation in California. And then from there, I moved to the field of social work, where I was directing a crisis center for homeless families in San Francisco. We're centralizing the family shelter system of the San Francisco County. That was an incredible learning experience that I had the opportunity to go through. And then right after that, my wife and I moved to Bloomington, Indiana, where I had the opportunity to become introduced to the field of career services accidentally. I have loved it ever since. And at Indiana University, I did a second master's in instructional design. And then I did a PhD in instructional systems technology in the School of Education of IU. I have been progressing throughout the last, as my fifth career. I also do music. I'm a composer, I'm a singer, and recently I've been singing opera and oratorio, and I can't have enough of it. That's my lifeline, right? But I have been progressing throughout the last 20 years as my fifth career in higher education. And today I'm Associate Provost for Immersive Learning and Career Design, and have the privilege of co-leading Launch, which I find fascinating every day, and work with a wonderful group of people to make that happen.
Great, thank you. So now that you all have introduced yourselves, we can get into the really good stuff. So the next question I have for you is about your identity, right? So this panel is about ethnic and racial heritage. And so there's an understanding that all of us as people of color, right, have some experience of how our identities have sort of shaped our trajectory. And so I'm wondering how your identity or how that identity has impacted your journey, and what challenges or opportunities have influenced your choices, your strengths, and who you've become, like sort of who you've introduced yourself as. So I'll start with Rachel.
This is so exciting. Thank you, Dante. Yeah, for sure. So my journey has definitely been impacted in so many ways by my identities as a queer Black woman. So having these identities, I grew up and I always felt like I had to constantly choose between the different oppressions that I faced when it should always be intersectional. That's something I definitely learned along the way. And now I'm like always that friend or like that colleague or that staff member that's always like, how can we be addressing this like intersectionally, right? Because, you know, we're not a monolith, right? So I constantly navigate spaces that aren't designed for me. And you have to make seats at tables when they're also not designed for you, or make your own table, right? And so that's something I love, like teaching students and having so many intersecting identities myself that were marginalized in my undergraduate, especially going to a predominantly white institution. I realized I wanted to like make it my career path and help others who were similar to me. So first gen, identified as, you know, Black or queer, all these other things, just marginalized in general. So I didn't want students to feel alone and isolated like I had felt. So now I see my identities as strengths. So that was, you know, something that I was working through, especially with like imposter syndrome or internalized oppression. And now I don't see it as like necessarily a weakness at all. It's like the biggest strength, right? To educate others about my experiences and my identities and bring my authentic self to work every day to teach students that you can, you know, have a career and be who you truly are. And, you know, just forget the respectability politics in a sense, not, you know, but to an extent, so you can bring your full self to wherever you show up. So thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. So Isha, what are your thoughts on this question?
I mean, now I got to go after Rachel, and come on. So as I mentioned, so I'm an attorney, and as a young Indian woman in this field is definitely challenging. I definitely felt that way. I worked at a firm for workers' compensation, you know, getting hurt on the job, and essentially everyone told me that it was an old white boys club, and definitely felt that way. I was definitely one of the, I had to be one of like 10, not even 10, I think like 5 young individuals in that field, and as a woman and as a minority as well. And I remember it was a struggle. You know, people would compare, or not compare me, they would confuse me with other Indian women because we all look alike. You know, coming up to me, asking me questions, and, you know, I'm always saying, you know, I'm not the person you're looking for. I look nothing like her, but so it's definitely been a struggle. And the way I deal with it is basically just be comfortable in my own skin. And I think that's the biggest struggle because, you know, we're always having challenges being thrown at us, you know, based on the color of our skin, our gender, our, you know, however way we identify ourselves. And the way I, you know, I surround myself by people who understand me, who are also on the same path, and just, you know, just kind of being okay with who I am, essentially. I mean, it's definitely been a struggle, but it's also been a strength. I definitely use that a lot in the courtroom when, you know, before all this COVID things happening, a lot of people in courtrooms, you know, judges, other attorneys never really saw me as an attorney. They always thought, you know, I was the clients that came in. So they would ask me, so, you know, look for your attorney, you know, try to like reach out to your attorney. I'm like, well, I am the attorney. So, you know, they would always say, oh, you're so young, how can you ever be an attorney? I'm like, well, I am. So the way I always deal with that is, you know my cases really well, and then show them up in court and laugh in the inside because I made this old white person look bad in front of the judge and everyone else. So that's kind of like my little pride every day when that happens.
Yeah, thank you. Daniel Pasco.
Thank you, Dansanette, and thank you for sharing, Isha and Rachel. My story has been interesting because even though, you know, I was living in Mexico and I grew up in a fairly low income environment. I remember my mom would send me to buy either tortillas or, you know, something at the store, and I would have to put. I was very careful to put half of the money in one pocket and half of the other because it was very likely that someone was going to ask me for money in a threatening way, and I would only give him half, right? If I had distributed my money in the two pockets. But my mother was a math teacher, and she ended up working in a private school. And then I got a scholarship to go to private school, which meant a couple of things. You know, someone without a lot of resources and someone with dark skin was going to a school all the way from kindergarten to high school, the same school, with a lot of people who either had parents who were from Europe or from the United States, who looked very, very different than me and had a lot of money. So I always felt out of place. And I mean, the nicknames that I had and the way in which they interacted with me, it was a rough, my K-12 education was quite rough. And then I come to the United States, and then I learn what it means to be an immigrant, right? And that has been a very interesting experience throughout. It doesn't matter how much I develop my English, it doesn't matter how much I know about the culture, it never goes away. It's always there. And part of that is, you know, my identity as a person of color, my identity as a Latino. But one thing that I have learned, you know, and this was very clear, I realized that that's one of the reasons for which I really like the multiple dimensions of identity model, because it really emphasizes how your dimensions of identity are so dynamic. They're moving all the time. And sometimes you are in a place of privilege, sometimes you are not, right? Depending on your environment, depending on where you are in your own perception, and depending on how you're interacting with others. And, you know, I very quickly came to understand that, you know, as often I felt I didn't have privilege, in many other areas I had privilege. And that others around me very often didn't have privilege like me, or I had a privilege that they didn't have. And ever since, particularly now, I've really, for the last maybe dozen years, I've had a very strong interest and focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm promoting that as a key strategy for how we should be solving the problems that we have, transforming leadership in our organizations, in our communities, in our countries, right, and in the world, and figuring out how to get to a better place, because we not only think it is morally responsible to include others, but because I think diversity is a key for our survival and our ability to thrive.
Thank you, Daniel. Yeah, we'll touch back on some points that all of you have made, but I'm interested to hear everybody's answers. So next, Dr. Prelo, can you talk a little bit about how your identity has affected your trajectory?
Yeah. Again, good evening, everyone. I can go on and on, but I'm going to try to be very brief. When I came to Drew was not as nearly as diverse as it is now, or even when Isha graduated in 2012. There's a 10-year difference. And so for me, when I was at Drew, EOF was Drew's diversity at the undergraduate level. And I'm glad to see these new staff persons at Drew. I believe that a college education is the best preparation for the world, but unless we have a commitment to diversity at the level of the undergraduate, and then our students go out into the world to become young professionals not equipped to exist in that diverse world. When I arrived at my PhD program at the University of Illinois, I brought everything with me. I brought my experiences as a first generation working class Black woman. I cannot separate any of those categories of identity. And I know most of you relate to that in some way. And my profession, as it still is in some degree, is a majority white male discipline when you talk about being a historian. So not only am I a first generation college student, I'm a first generation PhD on both sides of my family. And then I was called to serve ministry in a predominantly white Christian denomination. Outside of the ELCA, the Lutheran Church, Presbyterians are the most majority white homogenous denomination in these United States. And so with that, every day, every space that I enter into, I am constantly, as Rachel said, I'm entering into spaces that have not been designed for me. What keeps me centered is never forgetting from whence I've come. When I was at Drew DIS seminar, Ghana, West Africa, I attended with Reverend Dr. Obiri Ado, who has actually now moved back to Ghana. And I was introduced to a concept called the Sankofa bird. It's the idea of a bird whose body is faced forward and whose head is turned backward. So I believe I have a Sankofa historical, theological kind of orientation. And that simply means we cannot move forward into our present, let alone our future, until we know from whence we've come. But there is a trauma that is associated with being a person of color from working class backgrounds, going to all these majority white education. So I went to a Methodist, Presbyterian, and finishing up a degree at Lutheran Theological Southern Seminary. So I have all these predominant white Christian Protestant backgrounds. And I had to work very intentionally about staying connected to my roots. And what I mean by that is that we have to become, certainly some of us on this Zoom call speak more than one language. So in addition to being bilingual, we've had to be multilingual, which is to develop intercultural competence just to survive. But there also comes an emotional trauma. And I'll say my age, I'm 40 years old. I'm about 18 years removed from Drew. I've been in education most of my life in some way, in terms of formal education. But I am just now coming back to a place in my own development where I'm able to reach back and go back into my neighborhood. Because what Drew doesn't teach you, it doesn't teach you how to go back into your community and be this transformed person. And so you have to be intentional on knowing your story and sometimes reclaiming your story, but also too being authentically fully yourself. And so Drew's been a great experience for me, but the mere fact being a person of color has impacted my trajectory because it has always made me committed to not just opening the doors, but kicking the doors and then making sure the doors propped open for those who come behind me. And I'm just now at the point in my life and my career where I'm able to look back at Drew and now give back to Drew, not just financially, but showing up. Because even graduating from Drew is traumatic. And sometimes, I can't speak for all of you, but among my peers, it takes us a long time before we can even be back in, even if our experiences were positive, we sometimes didn't feel like we had the emotional intercultural support going through Drew. And so figuring out how to navigate that. But it was the same experience at the predominantly white institution of the University of Illinois, Columbia Theological Seminary, Lutheran Theological Seminary. So through it all, my commitment to keeping the narratives of people of color, not just African Americans. When I teach American history, I teach it from the vantage point of being a Black working class woman. Although I'm supposed to be middle class right now, but I'm looking at my college student loans and it doesn't feel that way. But I always teach in such a way that we have to decenter the grand narrative. We have to decenter the grand narrative of American history as white men, not to take away from their contributions, but to realize that American history is as valuable as Abraham Lincoln as it is Fannie Lou Hamer. And right now, my journey has taken me from majority white institutions of learning to historically Black colleges. Never attended a historically Black college, but they are equally important as well. And so I think Drew is the foundation, but the hard parts about Drew prepares us for the narrative. And I think fundamentally, if there's a theme to anything I've been saying, to everything I've been saying in the last few minutes, that is knowing that you don't have to lose sight of your story or where you have come from in order to keep on going and achieving, because Drew just becomes a tool and a vehicle. And so I just want students to know that they don't have to forsake who they are, regardless of what their cultural identity is. And I just don't only mean race, but I mean even to proclaim that, yes, I'm a Black woman that came to Drew from working class backgrounds, and that's okay. And so I'm at a point now where I'm not so much focused on legacy because I'm not like 50 or 60 yet, but I am intentionally now embracing the reality that every experience I've encountered is part of my resilience and my equipping strategy for it. And the other part of it is just the idea that Drew, even if it doesn't intentionally want to do this, it teaches you resilience. And so Isha, when you said you stood up in a courtroom and your pushback was doing authentically everything that you could do and doing it well. And I would just say that lastly, it's important that we build bridges, because I would not be able to even be on this call today if it wasn't for people like Dr. Lily Edwards or former EOS director Anthony Tillman and Dr. Cordelza Haynes, who's still at Drew. And so we really are a community of witnesses that need to kind of give back. So I hope the Drew Launch Program will be better able at connecting alumni of color, because Drew needs us. That was a lot, sorry.
No, it's fine. But thank you. That was a great response. And like I said, we'll dive into some of the, the detail of all of your answers in a little bit. So Daniel Vieira, excuse me, how has your race and ethnicity affected your identity, affected your trajectory? I mean, your time here at Drew.
Thank you. I would go as far as to say as I'm still kind of developing my identity, but what I've gathered up until now is I'm proud of being a male Latino. I'm proud of my heritage. I'm also a first generation student. I totally missed a bunch of details about what it is I actually do at Drew besides academics. I'm a marketing manager for Ariel, our Latinx Student Culture Society. I'm a tour guide coordinator in admissions, so I work alongside 4 other peers to help organize admissions events. I am also in club soccer, and I am a member of EOS, the FBS program that we have here. And I'm gonna tie back to my parents real quick. They serve as my motivation. They serve as what I use to keep moving forward and to overcome any obstacles I may encounter. My mother made it all the way here from Colombia by land. My father flew from Venezuela and slept in an airport for nearly 2 weeks before he could find himself situated. And just barely, it took him nearly 30 years to get to where he is now, if it's even comparable to what other people are fortunate enough to reach. But growing up in a single parent household, I guess financial restrictions definitely impacted what potential I had. I was born and raised in Union City, so shout out Hudson County. And I can get personal in the sense that I have my a close group of best friends who I thought we were all destined to have a similar path, but I find now, 3 years after having graduated from high school, I'm the only one who's currently enrolled in a 4-year institution. Some of my friends have had to drop out because of other financial situations. Some of them are now parents, and I know classmates who have taken the wrong paths in life. And I think I was equally exposed to many of those paths that my friends and peers have taken. And so I think I'm very fortunate in the sense that I had this vision of wanting to be the first student, the first person in my family to graduate with a college degree to keep me going. When I don't talk about this a lot, but when I first started looking at colleges, I only looked in state because, as much as I wanted to go and see the West Coast, how am I going to pay for that? So there was definitely something that was kind of holding me back, as well as my tight relationship with my mother. But again, I can only say that I'm fortunate up until now, and I'm hoping that I can keep pushing forward. I've been able to find a very supportive group at Drew. Whilst it may have been different before my time at Drew, I can say that I'm proud of who I've met, who I've had as mentors so far, and what I'm doing at Drew. I'm proud that I'm helping to revitalize and bring back Ariel as one of the most influential clubs on campus. I'm proud to, learn more about myself and identify skills to make me a leader, so that when I come back to Union City, I can give back to my family, my friends, my neighbors. Yes. Yes, that's my answer.
Great. Thank you so much, Daniel. And I'm glad that you and like several other panelists have mentioned mentors. Mentorship is really important, right? And to think about, especially as people who are navigating spaces that aren't created for you. We understand the society we live in, right? Like it's really created for white men. Really, even, white women have to sort of like shapeshift a little bit to fit into these boxes, right? And so understanding how to navigate these spaces is really difficult and can be traumatic, as Dr. Prelo mentioned. And so I'm interested to know, who were your mentors, right? Like who in the spaces that you've navigated thus far have helped to shape your experience, or at least to help to guide you in the right, on the right path. So we'll start with Daniel Pasco.
Thank you, Destiny. It's such an important question. It's interesting to me. I've always thought of mentors or mentorship as catalysts, right? Which sometimes could happen with one contact, one interaction can change your life. And some of the times it can be a long-lasting relationship you build with someone. I was very involved in church when I was growing up, and the minister of that church was very influential in my life, and he took it upon himself to play a mentor role in my development. And I remember vividly when I went and talked to him, and I said, I'm finishing my undergraduate degree in industrial design, but I really feel like I want to help others. So I'm thinking I might want to do another undergrad degree in psychology or sociology. I had all these things in my mind. He really took me out of that room. He went and made a call, And next thing, I was applying to a school where he had a network. And then I was in the United States doing a Master of Divinity. It was such an interesting way of leading, right, through mentoring. But I remember also, this is an interesting story. When I finished my Master of Divinity, I was so excited and proud and happy. I had come to another country. I had studied in another language, and it was rocky in the beginning, but I had finished my degree. So I wanted to be a minister. And I realized that they had used my OPT, so as an international, which meant that I only had 60 days to find a job or leave the country. And that was my first realization that there were career people. There was this career guy who placed you in churches for ministry. So I got really excited, right? I have help, and I go to this person in the denomination, and he tells me that that area is not open to Mexicans, and that, you know, he has good news that maybe I can start in a church as a janitor, and then one day when they trust me, I can become maybe a secretary, and who knows, one day I can become an assistant minister. And it's always been very interesting. I have no idea where it came from, but my reaction in that moment and ever since was, I'm going to prove you wrong. I was supposed to go to the guy to find placement, right? But I said, I'm going to prove you wrong. And I've always felt, that was a catalyst in my experience. And I've carried that with me all my life, right? And these encounters that you have with people, whether positive or negative, you know, probably my advice is to always think of mentoring as work, right? Don't approach people to mentor you and take care of you only. Approach people to be your mentors, because you're also going to be supporting them and contributing to their effort, right? And you develop this symbiotic relationship that very often lasts for a lifetime and can open doors that you never imagined, that will allow you to open doors for others when you become a mentor.
Thank you. That was a great answer. All right. So let's see. Isha.
So in terms of mentors, I don't think I've ever actually had a mentor, and I've regretted that a lot over the years, because in my thought process, I always thought that I had to, whatever I succeeded, I had to do it on my own. And, you know, I've had people that I've talked to regarding my field, and, you know, it was one of the Drew professors that got me into sociology and got me into law. So, you know, I really appreciate that. But in terms of one person or, you know, certain person to go to, I never had that until I actually got into law school. And at that point, I realized that it's not just me. There's a community of us around me all the time to really lean on. And one of the things that I really did that I'm really glad that I got involved in is an organization strictly for female attorneys, because we all struggle in this field. It is a very male-dominated field. And that was probably one of the best decisions, because I've met women all over the country. I've gone to conferences. I've just, really honed in on my skills and networking. I know that's one of the questions later on, but, that's really helped shape where I am right now and who I am, because, I got to listen to everyone else's experiences, how they became or how they got to where they are now. So that was, overall, that was, I guess, my mentoring or my mentorship. So, honestly, I regret not having one, but at the same time, I've kind of turned into one, because, one of the big things in my field is taking that bar exam, and it's a very dreadful exam. And, I didn't pass the first 2 times, and that's usually like a taboo topic. No one wants to talk about it, that you didn't pass. Law schools never prepare you for that, of that day of you failing. So I actually ended up working and writing a post with that organization that I was talking about earlier, and ended up mentoring a lot of women or, female law students, trying to take the bar, things like that, and, really help them through a topic that no one ever talks about, no one prepares you for, and it's real. It happens all the time. But so I think at the end of the day, I wish I had one. It could be anyone, teachers, friends, church members, just people in the community. I say reach out to everyone. You never know how they can help you, how they can bring you to the job that you're in, the job that you're going to be in, your dream job, or, not even job, just someone that you can rely on and they know that they have your back and they support you no matter what.
Thank you. And I just want to add, part of our work here at Launch, I mean, we talk about mentorship. We want to sort of help to like broaden the idea of mentorship, right? So, you have like maybe a long-term mentor that, is in a field that you maybe want to be in. And so you connect with them as you're moving toward that field. But I mean, I think to your point, Isha, there can be people that you meet that you have a conversation with who can point you in the right direction, right? And this like brief conversation or like shorter encounter can really change your life. And I think we want to try and realize those are mentorship in encounters too. And it's sort of different than the typical model of, this one person or like group of people. But just really thinking like it's a little bit more broad than we think of it typically. So maybe you have had a mentor, right? It's just like different. It's a little bit different than how we standardly think about it. But I think that's the beauty of, the whole concept. So yeah, thank you. Daniel Vieira.
Thank you, Dunstan. That's definitely an interesting concept. It's the first I've heard of it, so that's super cool to think about. As far as mentors go for me, can definitely highlight two that have come from Drew. First would be Raul Rosales, my Spanish professor, and also our Ariel advisor. He is also from Union City, so this is something that we were able to connect on immediately. But I actually didn't end up taking a Spanish class until my sophomore year of high school. So I had met him in the summer that I came to participate in my 5 weeks with EOS, and he talked to everyone, and I was like, okay, but I think I'm set with Italian. I think I'm going to explore that. I already speak Spanish, whatever. And I would always see like my roommate and a bunch of my other friends and EOS peers always rambling about how great this professor was. And I was like, what am I missing out on? It wasn't until I just had a random meeting with him where he gave me some really sound advice. And I realized that he was someone that I could look up to, someone who understood where I'm coming from, and someone who could just inspire me to find and tap into my best potential. So I'm very glad to have him during my time here at Drew. And then my other mentor, who is no longer at Drew, Mr. Robert Gordon, who was my admissions counselor. And I think he was my admissions counselor. He was the person who took me on a little impromptu tour when I stopped by one day in the spring of 2018. I just showed up randomly. I had not scheduled a tour, and it was after I had received my acceptance package from Drew. So I decided to check out campus for the first time. Immediately fell in love with the campus's natural beauty. And, I remember the weather being like pretty cold or rainy. It wasn't ideal weather. The campus still looked gorgeous though, but Mr. Gordon came and introduced me with such radiant energy. And when he took me on his tour, he just went out with no coat or anything and just, was happy to see me and happy to take me all over campus. And so I'm very fortunate that I met him that one time, because I had no idea that I would have more encounters with him later on. My last memory with Mr. Gordon was helping him for a college fair where he was reaching out to students who a good percentage were Spanish speakers. So he asked me for help with translating. And so we went down to Montclair State in the summer, and I helped him out with the whole presentation. And it was such a wonderful experience. And you know, I have to thank him a lot for the sound advice that he has given me, for the importance that he's shown me to stay in touch with my EOS, my FBS community. And just, remembering like who I am, and taking that with me in the future, no matter how far I go.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Daniel. Right, Dr. Prelo, who has helped to shape your trajectory?
Yeah, and I'll be even briefer. I'll just first start by saying that mentors come in all shape and sizes and identities. I would say my earliest mentor, I can go all the way back to like third grade, but I'll start at high school. Was my mathematics track and field coach, Mary Kennedy. I stay in touch with her to this day. She has cancer, she has lung cancer right now, as does my mom. And so just journeying with her through her lung cancer journey has been she's now providing mentorship in a different way. But so certainly Mary Kennedy, who literally drove me to Drew and typed my college applications on a typewriter. So that was really back in the day. But when I got to Drew, Dr. Lily Johnson Edwards, I worked as a student assistant in a Pan-African American Studies office. But I would just say that there's a African American or African concept that it takes a village. And certainly when I look back along my journey, even till this day, it does take a village. And I think sometimes mentors are part of your journey for the long haul until they transition to whatever they believe is the other side of living. But sometimes mentors are in your life for a moment, a day, but there are these defining moments that shape you and change and shift your trajectory. And sometimes mentors never say a word to you. They're just people that you admire their life and their career and their choices, and you learn from them from afar. And I would say that, Isha, it's never too late for mentors. And sometimes mentoring is not one person, but it's part of being a part of a professional group. And now, and I appreciate the broad perspective on mentoring that you all are trying to adopt and launch, because it takes a whole lot to mentor per Xavier, meaning that I need to get different things from different kind of people. And I didn't learn that until my late 30s. Like, I feel like I'm the older one in the group today. But I realized that I go to different people for different things. And when I got to college, working on my PhD, my dissertation committee was my mentor. But then when I launched into being a Presbyterian pastor, my mentor was Dr. Alice Ridgel, who was a young, single, under 40 Black woman who was a church planner, preaching and pastoring in rural South Carolina. And I think along the way, being able to define the role of mentors in your life, because sometimes we're looking for a big sister, we're looking for a life coach, we're looking for a mentor, but not everybody can play every hat or role. But I will also say that sometimes the best mentors are not the ones you go out looking for or pursuing. There are ones who, if I may use the word, is divinely, regardless of what you believe, that is divinely orchestrated in your life. You meet them because of a moment, experience, or just showing up at Drew and doing a campus tour. And, the goal is to understand too, that the relationship, even though they have a lot of knowledge and life experience, but actually mentors learn from their mentee as much as they pour into their mentee. And so I have found that the most productive relationships for me have been relationships with mentors that have been co-creational, meaning that the experience with me has shaped them as much as it has shaped me. Maybe not as much, but we both learn from each other and continue along the journey. For Dr. Lily Johnson Edwards, part of her greatest legacy is that she has two students of Pan-African descent who have gone on to get PhDs. Myself and Reverend Dr. Kamani, I forget his last name, but he's going to be teaching as an adjunct at Drew next semester. And then her son is a PhD in English somewhere. And so it's legacy, but mentoring is, I wouldn't be here today without mentors.
Thank you. And Rachel?
Y'all brought up some really great points, so very excited. And yeah, I agree. I feel like mentors too, like different times in life they're needed. So it was like very intentional for me about having Black mentors in particular. So like one of my mentors was my grad school's professor, and she was a 30-year-old Black woman that literally had a PhD, and I was like, I want to be that, right? Like, so I think like just being intentional, like kind of about like, you know, especially with your career. So my other mentor, he's Dr. David Jones. He's an EEO, diversity equity officer at the institution. That's like what I want to strive to do. So and those two people, I experienced like a lot of racial trauma in grad school, and they kind of took me under their wing. And I probably wouldn't be like standing here today without them. So that's why mentors are very important, especially for students. You mentioned, well, this question also mentioned like people that might have scaffolded you. And I wanted to touch on that because I think it's important as people of color, like you're going to experience people that like kind of like say that they're mentors to you, but actually are like causing you harm as people, as a person of color. Particularly, I had a lot of like white supervisors who's caused a lot of racial harm to me, but they kind of disguise themselves as like allies, and you know, that's dangerous and harmful to perpetuate that to especially students of color and just people of color. So just be mindful of that. So if you feel like at any point like this person's like contributing to my like stress and my development, especially as a person of color, you feel like you're getting gaslit, like if you can leave that situation, I would definitely say that. I think that's very important, especially for people of color. But yeah, I would definitely say it's important too to like, if you can find someone within your identities. And I agree, like in terms of like finding, you know, community, kind of like Isha was talking about, like, you know, they don't have to be like necessarily like in your field or older than you. Like I even see like people like Dunstanette or people like Jen Islam or Makana, you know, or Marie Joyner, like you know, people of color in my circle at Drew, because there's so few of us, that, you know, they provide me a safe space to be who I am, and I learn from them, they learn from me. So I think that's also important.
Oh, thanks, Rachel. I learned from you too. Um, so the next question, I mean, like, I think this is all great, right? And I think that, you know, like Rachel mentioned, like scaffolding is really important, thinking about, you know, how mentors sort of help to set you up for that next step, or at least get you thinking sometimes about things that you never even thought about before. Like, you know, I think even as like maybe first gen, right? Getting a PhD, if you're just thinking about, I just want a bachelor's, right? Like, I just want to get through, and somebody talks about a PhD and you're like, I never even knew that I could do that. I don't even know where to start. I don't know how to get into med school or to law school, or, you know, to get a master's, right? And so thinking about how important those um, interactions and encounters are, and how they really do sort of like put you in the right space, whether it's like physically or like mentally or emotionally, for whatever comes. Yeah, I think mentorship is probably one of the most important pieces of life and trajectory. So thank you all for sharing about your mentors, and how different people have helped to shape your life today. So the next question I want to ask, I think it'll be interesting because we have a mix, but like how has Drew, how's your experience at Drew supported your development and your journey to where you are today? I will start with Daniel Vieira. I know you're at Drew currently, so I think this will be interesting because you all are in different places.
Sure. Thanks again, Dunstanette. Let's see. I think I wouldn't. I used to say that I didn't like living a life with regrets, but then I learned that regrets are actually just experiences that we learn from. So something that I took away from high school was that I never really got involved with leadership positions. You know, I participated in extracurriculars, um, but I never got to take hold of a leadership position. And I think it was mainly because I didn't think I was fit to take one on, or several now. But it's a whole different story now at Drew. You know, I started with my first semester just trying to figure out what I was going to do for the rest of my life, and then realized maybe I should take it slow. You know, after speaking to my many mentors and advisors and even peers, I realized that I kind of have to focus on what I have now and, just work from there. Um, so I've managed to participate in different areas around campus. I think my first thing was getting a work study job with athletics that led me to meet upperclassmen and other faculty and staff members at Drew. I ended up then getting involved with Ariel as a freshman representative and club soccer. And now I'm going to fast forward to where I am now, and I now have a leadership position as the marketing manager for Ariel. And actually, I just before this, I was moderating an artist talk that I helped put together with the art department and the art history club for this Venezuelan photographer, and actually I guess a photography mentor of mine, whom I met because of Drew. It's a nice little story, maybe perhaps for another time, but I managed to make something happen from a simple DM to this photographer because I actually wrote, okay, I'll tell the story. I wrote about him for a history of photography final paper. I got an A on my analysis of his work, and I decided I would let him know, like, hey, I got a really good grade on this. I think your work is fantastic. I absolutely, I see you as a inspiration. And now a whole year later, I've gotten the support from Drew to bring, well, virtually, one of my, I guess, idols to come and speak to us, to the community. Apart from that, Mr. Gordon inspired me to get in touch with the admissions office and work as a tour guide. And from there, I found myself kind of falling in love with the whole admissions department and wanting to get more involved. And now I'm a tour guide coordinator. So now when we talk about these events, we're talking about events where we've had hundreds of students and families come. And now it's up to me and my team to make sure that everything's going according to plan, to make sure that tour guides are okay, make sure families are okay. And it's a lot of responsibility. But I didn't know that a lot of responsibility could be so fun. And so not even, and I think my favorite experience when we're talking about, when I'm talking about what has helped shape me into like a leader because of Drew. I participated in Drew Summer College of 2019, where I served as a mentor to high school students from the different boroughs in New York. And we kind of helped to give them a college simulation. And these students are, they touched my heart. We had so many good times. And, 2 weeks may seem like nothing, but I felt like now I've known them for so long. I've stayed in touch with them, and now I'm very glad to to say that the students I've had as mentees and all of these students are now college bound, and the experiences I helped give them, it wasn't just a one-way street. They taught me so much, and overall I wouldn't have had these opportunities if it weren't for Drew. So that's why I have to say that Drew has given me these opportunities to become a leader. And even Daniel Pasco, I participated in a launch class with him, and where I literally was able to identify what skills I have right now and what skills I'm developing as I'm going on at Drew. And thank you too. Thank you, Drew. It's what I gotta say. So I'm very happy with what I've done so far.
That's great. Thank you so much, Daniel. So Isha, can you talk a little bit about how Drew supported your development?
Yeah, so academically, it's really taught me a lot of skills that I can basically, transfer into anything, especially writing. I remember at Drew, I took like writing classes, specific like writing tutoring that has really improved my my writing, and that really helps, especially in my field. But also, outside of academics, kind of like what Daniel said, my big thing was leadership too. At Drew, I was a tour guide. I worked at the alumni organization. I was, leaders of various groups as well. And I think I was also part of like the government, like the student government. I mean, with all of that, in the past, I used to be really scared of talking in front of people, and I knew that was something that I really needed to overcome, especially in the field that I'm in right now, constantly talking in front of strangers. And you know, being at Drew, I basically forced myself to be part of various groups and being part of panels and talking in front of complete strangers and trying to get myself comfortable enough to be where I am now. And that has really helped me. And also seeing, I mean, kind of like what Dr. Prelow said, even back when I graduated at Drew, it wasn't as diverse as I'd wanted it to be. Obviously, there wasn't this launch or program. There weren't a lot of things. We did have the, I forget what they're called, affinity groups, like the trees, like the REL and other group houses like that. But in terms of feeling like I was home, I didn't get to feel that as much. I mean, yes, I was around a lot of individuals that were diverse. I was around Indians, Hispanics, everyone. But it still didn't feel like I was included as much because we didn't have all of these organizations that you guys all have now. And because of that, I made it a mission that whatever I did, I would include diversity and inclusion. And one of the big things is I used to work for the State Bar of Michigan, so an organization for attorneys, and I was a very big member of their diversity and inclusion committee. And so I used to, hold meetings for them. I used to, speak on behalf of my identity, my ethnicity, and, try to incorporate that as much as I can with other parts of my life. And one of the big things that at Drew, I used to be called an honorary Jew because I loved learning about everyone. And I was always at like the Jewish community, like getting involved. I like to get involved in other situations, like other cultures, and just learn about everyone and I think that's really helped me a lot with Drew because we were a little diverse, that we could it was open. It was, all inclusive. You could, if you wanted to go to, a party with all Muslims, or if you wanted to go to like a Latino place, or if you wanted to do this or that, you could go and you can experience it. No one judged you for it. And I think that really helped me shape who I am now and just my passion to learn about people and learn about cultures and learn about everything I can about just, who you are as a person, not who are you as a, what is your profession? Like, who are you specifically?
Thank you. All right, Dr. Prelow.
I would just say 2 words, diversity and social justice. It's hard for me not to be committed to diversity and social justice, even if I didn't sit on a diversity committee or if I was formally speaking about social justice. In some way or another, those 2 ways of being are part of my day-to-day normal. And it's not just limited to what I do as a pastor or what I do as an educator. Fundamentally, if I just stop to pause at any point in my day, I have a commitment and a calling and really the blessed burden of opening the door for other people. And so Drew just taught me that it wasn't enough just to get a degree. I then had to do something with it. And that wasn't only professional, but it is to always make sure that wherever my journey takes me, that I am using that to enhance the lives of other people. And sometimes that's just even in one-on-one conversation. And it's also to, sometimes I don't like doing this work, but it is educating other people about interracial or interreligious, intercultural dialogue. But even more specifically, the experiences of our white students at Drew are enhanced because of the diversity that students of color bring to the campus. And so that kind of trajectory has continued in all the majority of white spaces that I have gone. But I am also too hopeful that given the current racial climate across our nation, that our white colleagues across different professions are needing to do the work for themselves. I just happen to be someone who, because of my life experiences, can journey alongside of other people. And I would say that the Drew experience has taught me to be courageous so that I can be in dialogue with people who are different than me.
That's great. Thank you. Rachel.
Hey, yeah, so Drew has definitely like helped me grow as a young professional in a lot of ways. I absolutely love the students here because they're just like the best part of this job. They like always challenge me to think outside of like literally all the identities ever and just be more inclusive. And I like love when they challenge me on that. And a lot of my job is like advocating for marginalized students. And I also felt like Drew has taught me to practice what I preach, right? So I think a lot of the time, especially as like a Black woman in predominantly white spaces in terms of being a staff member, I think it's important. I learned that it's important to shed light on like news that affects marginalized students. I think a lot of times, like we would go into work and then, a Black person would be murdered and people would try to ignore it. And so, a Black fatigue is real. That's something that Drew taught me as well. So for example, like we see like on the news, another Black person that was murdered or something like that. There was like, it felt like a culture of like, oh, just we're just gonna ignore it and pretend everything's okay. Like for example, this morning, I woke up and saw that Kawan Charles was a 15-year-old Black boy that had been mutilated and similarly murdered to Emmett Till. And it's not, national news, but at the same time, it's important to bring attention to that because these students are feeling it too, right? So if you're there to support the students, that means me in my position of power and privilege as a staff member, how am I talking to my colleagues about how can we support students that are going through this, right? Especially over the summer, I did a lot of work to try to help, like allies understand and be better allies, right? And not contribute to the racial trauma, but, be a part of that where students can feel more comfortable. And I kind of say all that to say like, definitely like it's, trying to teach. Drew taught me to teach allies that might not identify with certain identities, like to acknowledge that they have privileges where they don't, you can choose to ignore something if you'd like, but like, how is that going to help, especially if you're dealing with students and you're mentoring and, being a part of the student life and atmosphere, and that should be intersectional always, right? I think that Drew has taught me to, expand my education to allies and educate them, and not always look and teach them not to always look to the oppressed people to bring the light to what's going on in the world. And I think like just teaching them like support, like checking in on your underrepresented groups from time to time, especially with everything that's going on, and then giving grace to marginalized students, right? We're kind of expected to perform at the same rate as our white peers, and that's just not just students but staff and faculty, when our world might be falling down around us due to different things like racial injustices. So like Drew has taught me so much about that, and so I do appreciate that. So that is my answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel.
All right, Rachel, side note, who was it that you were talking about that was mutilated? I missed that altogether.
Yeah, I can put it in the chat. Yeah, I'll just put it in the chat for you.
Thank you.
So Daniel, this is Daniel Pasco. How has Drew shaped your trajectory, supported your development?
That's such an interesting question for me. Drew is a very special place in that it has allowed me to pursue what I have seen is a very important need in higher education and in society at a systemic level, right? I had, in the 19 years that I had done career services, I had always tried to do things as comprehensively, as holistically, as systemically as possible. And there is a place where I have been able to do it the most systemically. And to me, when thinking about systems, you think of interrelations and interdependencies, and immediately go straight into diversity, equity, and inclusion, into intercultural development. So it's been a fascinating journey of figuring out to work with the entire campus to try to develop a curriculum that is accessible, that is inclusive, that tries to develop equity across the different types of students who are on campus and in our student body. And to me, that has been moving, it has been exciting, it has been fantastic to work with all the people involved to try to figure out how to do it better, and how to constantly, as an ongoing and aspirational process, right? Never-ending evolution of our development as an institution in order to support our students in the best capacity that we have. It has allowed me to expand, and we lost one income recently, and I have then started to consult. So I consult on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and on organizational development at institutions. And I'm working with a number of different universities at this point. But it's just such an important need. And unfortunately, many of our current inequities or our existing inequities have been surfaced by what has been happening politically and socially. I think I've been there all the time, but it is such an important time for us to focus on figuring out how to develop equity and to developing ourselves interculturally and to trying to address our privilege and underprivileges, right? In our institutions, in our communities, in society, and in the globe. And it has allowed me also to propose a systemic approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education institutions through the implementation of 5 systemic levels, which I have had the opportunity to help either areas in institutions or institutions to begin to implement. I think all the time, like when I was going through my K-12 and my undergrad experience, what would I have liked to have my experience feel like and look like, and trying to open a space for all students to develop interculturally and try to make sure that we're concretely offering paths for success, equitable access to students from diverse minority identity groups. I think is just a responsibility, not just a good thing to do, right? But it is time that we respond and that we develop a new diverse generation of leaders that is ready to fight for equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Daniel. All right, so we are nearing time. If any of you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I think so just like very students, marginalized students at Drew who are probably having a difficult time adjusting or going through because of issues related to their identity, especially as it relates to ethnicity and race. What would you say to them? 1 minute or maybe like 45 seconds for each person. I'll start with Isha.
You mean within Drew or just in general?
Yeah, like a current student.
I would, based on what everyone said, I would honestly find someone or find a group. There are lots of people at Drew, in the world in general, that are struggling, whether it's with their identity, whether it's, there's just so many things I can't really think right now. But essentially, there's always someone out there that either identifies with you, feels what you're feeling, knows your struggles, has gone through it. I would say use your voice, find out, meet people. The best thing is to meet people, share your story, learn from others. And, hopefully you'll find someone who either is there to support you. And also what Rachel said, find out, make sure that they're there to support you. Don't, make sure that they're not there for their goodwill and they're kind of just stringing you along. But yeah, I would essentially just say, talk to people. We're all struggling with something. So might as well start what's within you first.
Great, thank you. Daniel Vieira.
So could you just please repeat the question? I kind of missed a little bit about it.
Sorry, I mean, if you just had like quick advice to give to fellow Drew students who might be like struggling with their identity, especially as it relates to ethnicity and racial heritage, right? What would you say to them?
This may sound a little weird, but I'm gonna explain. I would say look for a wall. When I say that, I mean look at the many posters and flyers that are always hanging around several, if not all, buildings, and there's always something for someone on that wall. So whether it may be an event that Ariel is hosting, we normally host a Cena Navideña, a Christmas dinner, a holiday dinner, where we invite everyone to come on down and just share some food with us and enjoy the holiday spirit with us. If you need that like family type of, I guess, orientation, that family kind of environment, then it's perfect to come and join us. Whether you identify as Latino or not, we're open to the whole community. If you are looking to find a group, there may be clubs that are or organizations that are not offering, but have applications open, and they're looking to bring in new members. What I mean by look at the wall is look for the opportunities that present themselves for you at Drew. It may not be what you're looking for, but it may bring you to a door that you'll be happy to walk past. Oh, not walk past, walk through. Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. Daniel Pasco.
I just have a very brief, but I think important message. It is very important that you think of yourself as part to the promise of our future. When I see students who either come from underrepresented, underserved, minority identity students, I truly see your diversity as the key strategy for our success, for our survival, and for our ability to thrive. And Drew University is and needs to continue becoming a place where we figure out how to help you harness that opportunity and to rise to leadership. We're here to help you, but it's clear that our leadership needs to be diversified. It is clear that we need solutions that include your perspective and your knowledge and your skills and your experiences. And it is clear that we need to address this together. So we see you as our new leadership, and we want to work with you to help you succeed.
Great, thank you. Rachel, what would you say?
Yeah, so mine's gonna be a little dramatic because that's just me, but find your community, right? Find people who validate your identities, find your own joy because no one can take that away from you. That is very important. Tell your story as an act of resistance, and activism. Don't be afraid to step outside of your comfort zones when you can. Don't waste your time and energy trying to get people to understand you, especially as a person of color. If they don't respect your identities or thoughts, and don't equate. I think for me, I equated my success with whiteness and the dominant culture a lot. Don't do that. It's a waste of time, I promise. We all do it. And then lastly, recently I learned this, right? You have to have every right to speak out and advocate for yourself and others. They want you to be quiet. They teach us to be quiet. So I'm gonna drop, a little Audre Lorde quote before I end. I have come to believe over and over again that what is most important must be spoken, made verbal and shared, even at the risk of having it bruised or misunderstood. That speaking profits me beyond any other effect. So, and that's the thing too. Look for research people that are within your identities, and really like, you know, for example, Black feminist thought like saved my life, right? Bell Hooks, those people, right? Because they validated me through, you know, theory. So find that within yourselves. And that is my advice. So thank you all.
Yeah, gotta love some bell hooks. Dr. Prelo, what would you share with students?
Well, my 45-second, I was about to say 45 minutes, my 45-second spiel would be just believe that you deserve a seat at the table like everyone else, regardless of who else is. And also believe that regardless of where you have come from, where you come from enriches your narrative moving forward, but it does not define where you shall go. It's part of you, but it does not define where you shall go. And you should bravely believe that that you deserve a seat at the table, whatever the table may be. See, I did good. 45.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you to all of you for sharing your time with us this evening for our Ethnic and Racial Heritage Community Panel. I'm sure that everything that you shared will be really enriching to our students who are part of this community, who are interested, even students who aren't, right, but who want to learn about what other people's experiences are like. Again, I just want to say thank you. We are coming up on time. But yeah, I just can't say thank you enough. Have a great evening and we will all be in touch.
Thank you, Danstonet, and thank you, everyone. This was fantastic. Thank you,